Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. What we are going to talk about today is everything related to night fishing in the summertime. This isn't going to be your regular old video. This isn't going to be go out and throw a black and blue jig and a black worm, although we will talk about that. We're going to talk about some things that you may have never heard. We're going to talk about color in ways that you don't expect. In fact, let's just touch on that right off the bat. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of throwing dark colors at night. And if you think I'm crazy, watch this video. I'm going to explain myself and I'm going to convince you to start throwing white and chartreuse at night. We're going to talk about a lot of things that you may or may not have ever heard. We're going to talk about traditional, jig versus worm versus creature bait as one category. We're going to talk about deep cranking. Then we're going to talk about that whole spinnerbait, chatterbait, swim jig thing. And then we're going to wrap this up talking about big baits, talking about swim baits, talking about topwater. 4 very different categories, all very important for night fishing, and we're about to do it all in one video. This one is going to be a little long, guys, but we're going to talk about night fishing in ways that you probably have never heard it before. Let's start off right from the top. Going to the bottom, fishing slow. You got your big worm, your big creature bait, and your jig. So what's the deal? When do you throw which? How do we do it? Here's what I'm going to say about that. There's basically 2 rigs, and this is just your standard going out night fishing. I don't care if you're on a boat, I don't care if you're on the bank. You want to slow down, fish bottom. It's definitely the #1 way to night fish. It's going to be either that jig or that worm. Here's what I want you to know about this style of fishing. You need to be prepared to do both. The thing about the night bite is that the fish go back and forth. Okay, so you go out on a Monday night and they are plowing a Texas rig worm. And the way that we rig this worm, Texas rig, big hook, I use a brass weight glass bead. It's got a ton of racket when they bang together. So what I do is I put a bobber stop on my line first. I move it up about 1 inch or 2 above the worm. Then I put my brass weight, then my glass bead, and then I tie my hook on. Texas rig, 10-inch worm. If I could only have one worm for night fishing, there's no question, 10-inch black power worm. That's my #1 bait. It worked when I was a little kid. It'll work tonight. It's so consistent. But here's the thing about that night bite. They are either on a worm bite or a jig bite. A Texas rig bite or a jig bite. They almost never cross over. Almost never. So you need to be prepared with both. Any time that I go night fishing, I have both tied on. And I'm going to fish one, I'm going to fish the other. Fish one, fish the other. Until I find the one that the fish are keying on. And it's almost never is it going to be like a mixed bag. You're not going to catch 10 on a jig and 10 on a worm. You're going to catch like 1 on a jig and 15 on a worm. Or 20 on a jig and 0 on a worm. Or 2 on a worm. It's going to be drastic. So you're fishing them the same way. Down on bottom, fish them slow, shake them, drag them, shake them. You want to create a little commotion down there. Now, color-wise, we'll mix it up a little bit. The worm, I do throw black. That's just my standard. It makes sense in my head. The fish eat it. It works great. But the jig, sometimes I throw black blue. The darker the night, so the closer you get to the new moon, true darkness, I'll lean towards that darker black or black blue jig. But if I'm getting closer to the full moon, I go away from that completely. I go to a totally natural jig. My #1 jig color at night, no question, is a color called molten craw. It's brown. It's a variety of browns, brown, black, brown, like 3 or 4 different shades of brown, but it's a brown jig. #2, is called Go-To. Here's the kicker. It's my favorite color in the daylight too. Brown and green pumpkin. That's my standard night jig. I don't worry about it. The fish have no problem hunting at night. Yes, they hunt by sight, but they hunt with so much more than that. They hunt with their lateral line. They feel. they can feel a jig. It's displacing a lot of water. I also add some nights, the darker the moon, I tend to add a rattle. Some jigs are set up ready to receive a rattle. Most of them aren't. So we order these little rattle collars. You put your rattles on them, slide them on there, and then put your bait on. So it fits in here between the jig and the creature bait, and it just pins it in there. Adds jigs, so when you shake, or adds a rattle, so when you shake it, you get that little bit of sound. Same concept that you're getting by using that old brass and glass. You couldn't make me use brass and glass in the daylight, but I'll throw it at night. Works great. So guys, don't be afraid to experiment with color. And then my jigs, everything I throw at night has a big old massive hook in it. That's just a fact. That's the way it is. I like a giant hook because I'm hoping to catch a giant fish. But trailer wise, I basically have a couple. I throw the beaver, same stinking thing I throw in the daylight, just a little craw profile. This is the Archelon, which is going to give me a little more action. It'll swim and kick. It's one of my favorite flipping baits. That's a great option. Only other way that we're going to mix it up on that slow bite on the bottom is the nights that you're on that worm bite, or the worm is working better, try a brush hog. Take your worm off your Texas rig, put a brush hog on. Why will they eat a worm and not a jig? I don't know. Some nights the bass are just funny. But it gets even crazier when they won't eat a jig, but they'll eat a brush hog. They'll eat a creature bait. But it happens, guys, so try it. And try not to get caught up in color. Really, if you already own these baits for daylight, throw the same colors you already have. If it gets really dark out there, darker colors have a good profile. But the lighter it gets, I mean, crawdads don't turn jet black at night. You don't need a jet black jig. A brown crawdad, whatever color it looks in the dark, is the same thing that my brown jig is going to look in the dark. It's not a big deal. I hope that's simple for you. Moving on to the next category. Let's talk crankbaits. I typically deep crank at night. I don't do a lot of shallow cranking at night. Deep crank. Color, hands down, my number one color, chartreuse blue. Hands down. This is the 10XD. That's my deepest diving bait. It's got a ton of sound. I love that 10XD at night. It's got a heavy thump, a lot of sound. It's down there digging bottom. Those fish just eat it up. Plus, when I hook them, I've got them hooked up on 1/0 hooks. It's more like a swim bait fish. So I've got a really high chance of getting that fish in the boat. But my number one color, definitely chartreuse blue. My number two color, white. Some version of white. This is a Norman DD22. Growing up, the DD22 was our bread and butter for night fishing. It's kind of bread and butter for the daylight too, honestly. Still crushes it at night. Such an underrated bait. Again, a loud bait, much smaller profile, and it gets down deep, it digs, those fish can find it. They love that thing. Don't throw the silent, throw some rattles at night. The DD22, again, white, and then if I have a third on those real dark nights, I go to either black or red, any of those darker colors. I don't care too much. I go through my day box and I pick out the dark ones on the dark nights. But I'm telling you right now, guys, if you have got a big moon, if there's a lot of light out there, throw bright colors. Just trust my judgment on this. Try it on your fish. If you're out there in the dark, your buddies are not doing it. The people you're fishing against are not doing it. That other black light you see out there in the dark, he's not doing it. Throw some chartreuse. They massacre it. What I think it is at night these fish are hunting primarily by feel. That's why I don't think the color matters. But when you start getting towards the full moon, you're getting that brighter moon, you're getting more light, they start visually feeding. They can see the chartreuse the best, followed by white. On a true full moon, sometimes chartreuse is too much, and that's when I crush them on the white. But when you're getting near that moon, I'm telling you, try the bold colors. Don't go with that historical thing that you found. And then as far as which bait to throw when, If I'm fishing deep, I throw that 10XD. If it's just crushing bottom and getting stuck all the time, then I go to a DD22 or to a striking 6XD, get where I'm not digging quite as hard. If I'm going shallower than that, I tend to leave the crankbait behind, and that's when I switch over to that spinnerbait, chatterbait, swim jig. Start talking about this stuff. I'm gonna make this part just as simple as I can. Just as simple as I can. Traditionally, what do people tell you to do? Throw a black worm and a black spinnerbait with a Colorado blade. You can take that and throw it out the window. Obviously, a black worm works. And obviously, a black spinnerbait with a Colorado blade works. But this isn't how to catch the same fish as everyone else. That's not what this video is about. So check this out. If you are in a lake that has a heavy shad population, I want you to trust me long enough to try this. I don't care what color you throw. Again, bright moon, throw those brighter colors. Dark moon, throw your darker colors. But just check this out. If there's a pile of shad in your lake, throw a spinnerbait with a double willow. There is something about, I don't know if you know this, different spinnerbait blades sound completely different underwater. A Colorado and a willow, they don't sound like two different spinnerbaits. They sound like completely different things. It's like trying to compare the sound of a 10XD to the sound of shaking a jig on the bottom. They're completely different sounds. I don't know what it is about the double willow and shad, but it clearly mimics them very well. Because if I'm on a shad fishery, a place where they primarily eat shad, they eat a double willow so much better than everything else. Just try it. Just try it. If it's not a shad fishery, then I start mixing it up. Try that chatterbait, the swim jig. Now I throw the swim jig everywhere. But the chatterbait, if it's not a shad fishery, I like the chatterbait because the chatterbait has a little better hookup ratio. The trouble with a spinnerbait is they'll come in, sometimes they'll just eat the blades, and you don't get them with the hook. So you either have to add a big trailer, like a big thumping Kitech on the back of it, so that they hone in on the hook too and get that spinnerbait, or put a big stinger hook on there. But when you go to the chatterbait, all that vibration, it's in line with the hook, so they tend to come in and get the whole thing, and you get a better hookup in them. So if it's not primarily shad, I actually start with the chatterbait. And then the swim jig, what's the deal with the swim jig? Guys, we've been throwing a swim jig at night for years and years and years. We're throwing the California swim jig. It's the one with the ginormous hook in it. That's why we do it. Don't worry about color. Again, my number one color, chartreuse and blue. It's called citrus shad. My number 2 color, tactical shad. My number 3 color is any of the bluegill colors. Alabama brim. This guy right here. Any of the bluegill profiles are my number 3. Don't worry about perfectly matching the hatch. But if it's a bold moon, if it's a bright moon, throw the bold colors. If it's not, just go natural. Get a bluegill profile jig, because it looks a little bit like everything. A bluegill bait in the dark with some green pumpkins on it and some dull colors on it. I mean, it looks like a shad, it looks like a bluegill, it looks like a bass, it looks like 1,000 other bait fish. The beauty of the swim jig is you can fish it fast, mid-column, and twitch it, draw reaction strikes when they're up feeding. But you can also slow down and just grind bottom, just creep, just barely creep with that bait, and get those fish that aren't active at all. You're almost down there playing that same game as the traditional jig and the 10-inch worm. So you can do both with it. Again, just like I said, I always have that standard jig and that 10-inch worm tied on. I always have a swim jig tied on. Typically, a 3/4 ounce California swim jig, or a 1/2 ounce. Actually, I throw a 1/2 ounce a ton. It's probably not fair to say mostly a 3/4. 1/2 ounce, more than anything. Paired with a 4.8 Kitech. Get down there and just creep. Just creep bottom. And if it breaks contact to the bottom, just free spool it. Let it fall back down until it hits bottom. And then just keep creeping. they just get after it. And we catch a lot of big ones on it. It's a fantastic crossover into the swim bait game, because in my hand, that thing is not very big, but when it's in the water and that skirt puffs up, it is big. And I think, this is just my 2 cents, I think what happens, because I've had nights where this thing outfishes a swim bait so hard it's not even funny. Here's what I think it is. Again, the bass, they can key in no problem in the dark. They don't have a problem seeing that bait. So I think they get on that bait and they start tracking it. And it's just slow creeping bottom. That bass follows that thing. Especially if you're on a pressured fishery. Even at night, these fish are cautious. It comes in and it hits bottom, hits a rock, hits a stump. Anything that stops the action. When that happens, that shock happens, you get an actual shock wave off that bait, but the skirt puffs up. Many times I've been creeping bottom and I just go thunk, I just bang into something, bump a rock, bump a log, bump anything. It goes thunk, and then it goes wham! I think what happens is those wary bass that aren't willing to make a mistake on anything else, they're just following that thing, just watching it. Just keeping an eye on it. And when it hits something, that little shock wave happens and that whole skirt puffs up. I think it mimics that like shocked, stunned, doesn't know what to do bait fish. And it triggers. I mean, how many times have you seen bass sitting around bluegill and absolutely nothing's going on? They're all just living. And you step on the trolling motor and a bluegill freaks out and a bass just mashes it. Or your trolling motor scares the bait fish and the bass just come in there and eat them. It's that trigger. I think when that swim jig bumps into something and does that little puff up, that it gets that same trigger. I think that's why we catch such big fish on that swim jig. Last but not least, swim baits. I'm gonna make swim baits easy for you. If you're fishing bottom, I'm almost not even gonna get into it. There's like a dozen swim baits that we throw on bottom at night, just creeping. But Kitech now makes the 6.8 and the 7.8. And they're cheaper. They do a great job. They're not perfect for every application, but if you just want to try it this summer when you're out there night fishing, get a 6.8 Kitech, get an 8/0 owner beast hook, 8/0 or a 10/0, and rig that sucker up weedless. Throw it out, let it hit bottom, and then just creep. Now, if you're on a totally bare bottom, I use my Matt Allen swim bait head. I use a 3/4. Do the same thing, rig it on there, throw it out, let it hit bottom, just creep. That simple. But what I really want to talk to you guys about in this video, what I'm amped up to talk to you guys about, is Wakebaits, topwater. Because in the summer, man, it can be a riot. So I'm going to make this easy. I'm going to give you 3 baits. There are so many good wake baits on the market. Price range, I mean, the gamut is just wide open. You can spend $50, you can spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So how do you know what baits to choose? Here's a couple for you. If you're around cover of any kind, cover or grass, you need a bait with a lip on it. Especially if you're on the bank. If you're on the bank and you start banging into wood or even heavy grass or rock or anything, you're going to hang up, you're going to break off, and that's brutal. But on a boat too, you don't want to be getting hung up and then go up there and mess all your water up. So if there's cover of any kind, you want a lipped bait. I'm going to make this easy. The 2 that I'm going to throw, Mike Buka has a bowl wake bait. That guy right there. This is the Spro Rat. There are all kinds of rats on the market. There's all kinds of wake baits on the market. Here's why these 2. They're lipped. Most of them are. More importantly, easy access to them. What I mean, this Buka bait, it's got a lot of sound to it. The beauty of a wake bait is that it pushes a huge V in the water. Now, so does a buzzbait. A lot of people throw a buzzbait at night. I'm actually going to push you away from a buzzbait. Just this time, I want you to try something different. Again, you're not trying to catch the same fish as everybody else. Your fish have seen a buzzbait. If you insist on throwing a buzzbait, throw a double buzz. 2 big props out front. You're going to push a bigger wake, and you can go slower. It's easier for the fish to hone in, track, and eat it. Throw a double buzz. But I really recommend a wake bait. And the reason why is when you come by a little fish, they're not afraid to eat it. We catch tiny fish on these, pound, 2 pounds. I catch bluegill on them. I've literally caught bluegill on big wake baits, 9 and 12-inch wake baits. Once the lights go out, size, fish don't care. They'll kill everything. So don't be afraid of the wake. The benefit of the wake, it catches little rats. But when you cross paths with a monster, she sees that big V wake on the surface and she comes up to inspect it. When she's looking at a buzzbait, there's not actually a whole lot there besides the disturbance and the sound. And they will eat them. But when they come up behind that thing and there's an actual presence in the water, they get underneath it and they see that fish up there swimming. Your odds go way up of a monster taking a shot at that bait. That's why the wake bait. You're not going to lose anything on the low end. You're going to gain on the top end. Now, why this wake bait? It's cost effective, but here's why. It's stumpy. It's a short bait, big profile, but it's short and has a fiber tail. A tail that will crush down. It doesn't get in the way. Here's what's important at night. The fish are coming up. They don't have perfect visibility like the daylight. They're going to take the best shot that they can. This bait, when they come in on it because it's stumpy, they're going to aim for the middle. If they do get the tail, it's not in the way. It'll collapse. You have great odds of them getting the hook. That is why this bait. You want to optimize your chance of when they do take the shot, that they get the hook and there's nothing in the way. Now, why the Spro Rat? Well, the rat in the first place, same exact thing. This bait swims head down, tail up. This is the part that's actually up on the surface. The head is just below the surface, pushing a big bulging wake. Tail up. When they come in on this thing, again, tail's not in the way. I don't like to throw a wake bait that has a big hard tail at night. I just don't. Because they can come in, clamp that tail, bail off it, and never get the hook. So rat baits, again, just like that bull wake, they're gonna get a hook. That's your best shot. They're gonna come in behind this bait and get a mouthful. They're at least gonna get that back hook, if not both hooks. The Spro specifically, because of price. It's an inexpensive option and they're solid. It's got a ton of racket, it's got a rattle in it. It's gonna be a big profile in the water, a lot of sound, a big wake, good hookup ratio, price is right. Why not? Now, if you already own a more expensive rat, by all means, throw it. But if you just want to try a rat for night fishing, that's a killer option. Last but not least is this bait right here. Comes in 4 colors. This is an 8-inch Spro. It's the BBZ. Specifically the floater, okay? Comes in 4 colors. I do not care which one you buy, neither do the fish. They're all basic fish colors. They're gonna come up on the bottom of it. It's gonna have a light colored bottom. That's good enough in the dark. It really is, it's all you need. They're silhouetting it to the surface. They're not sitting there staring at it. The BBZ, if you don't have cover in the water, if it's open water, if you're paralleling shore, if you're throwing out over points, if you don't have a bunch of grass, I don't know that you can beat this bait because it's loud, kicks a big wake. Again, it's got a rattle in it, it's loud. Kicks a big wake, and then most important of all, there is no lip. So same concept, soft tail, no lip, even better when they come in to shoot for it, nothing but hooks. They are gonna get that hook. And that's the key. Getting the bites is hard enough, right? You're already out there in the middle of the night. You don't want to miss your opportunity. Those 3 baits, there's so many good wake baits out there. I mean, the Slammer's a great wake bait. There's so many good baits. But if you just want to keep it simple, you just want to try something that's going to hook up well, it's going to work everywhere. These are size profiles that will work on the biggest bass in California, they'll work on the biggest bass in Texas, and they'll work on the smallest bass up north. I mean, you'd be amazed what will come up and hit a wake bait. It'll blow your mind, it really will. Don't be afraid to try it, and those are fantastic baits that are going to hook up really well. that is a rundown on night fishing, guys. I mean, we're already passing like the 25-minute mark. I don't know if you noticed that, but I'm just going to give you a little bit more. Let's talk about moon phase real quick. And I don't know if you noticed yet, we're talking true night fishing. Some of you don't realize that. You've made it this far and you're still trying to understand night fishing. We're talking pitch black dark. We're not talking about the last hour of daylight before it gets dark. You can fish the entire night, all the way through to daylight. Now, there are places in the country that won't let you, but most of the country will. And night fish and day fish, they don't seem to mix. You can have a horrible daylight bite going, catching 10 pounds a day, 8 pounds a day. Go out there in the dark and now you're catching 15, 18, 25, 35 pounds. Huge bags of fish. Because they don't mix. Sometimes the night bite's terrible, the day bite's great. Sometimes the day bite is terrible, night bite's great. Sometimes they're both great. But you gotta try it. We don't use black lights. I'm just gonna throw that out there. Just a couple bonus tips for you guys. We don't use black lights. We truly believe in fishing blacked out. We don't use fluorescent lines. We fish braid, especially in the summertime, straight braid. In the wintertime, when my reaction gets slow because I'm so cold, I'll add a mono leader, but a heavy mono leader, like 20, 25 pound, because the fish will pick it up. And if I'm on straight braid and my reaction's slow, they'll feel me before I feel them, and I feel them spit it before I can swing. But in the summertime, when it's hot out, you're comfortable, typically I'm on straight braid. So that as soon as they tag it, I tag them, and then I've got them basically tied to a rope. At night, you want to up your odds. There's no issue of visibility with your line, so don't worry about it. You don't need some crystal clear, high dollar line. Throw it on braid. You'll land more of your fish. You have less to worry about. But again, we don't fish with black lights. It's personal preference. Plenty of people do, and they catch giant fish. But my belief is a black light is still visible light. It may be low, but it's still visible light. Probably doesn't matter on a 2-pounder. Probably doesn't matter on a 3-pounder. Probably doesn't matter on a 15-pounder. But if I'm trying to catch the biggest fish, why risk it? Because the biggest one is the smartest one. That's reality. She's been through the most. That's the one I want to catch. So I'm going to put all the odds in my favor. I'm going to fish braid so that my reaction time is faster. I've got great feel. And I'm going to fish completely blacked out. You'll get used to it. It takes a little time, but you will get used to fishing in total darkness. And then last but not least, which moon should you fish? Most people fish the full moon. And traditionally, that's what people talk about. Fish the full moon when you're night fishing. And we'll be out here on the lake. There won't be a soul. That full moon will roll around. There's 10 boats out here in the dark. 15 boats out here in the dark. Now, that's not a lot of boats compared to the 200 boats in the daylight, but it's still a lot of boats, and when the whole world is quiet, the fish seem to be really aware of that boat traffic. So, if you've got a day job, if you work a 9 to 5, you fish any day you can, all right? Any night you can. But if you have a choice, I'm going to make this really simple. I'm just going to eliminate half the calendar. I want you to fish the 3 days before and after the full moon, and the 3 days before and after the new moon. Half the calendar is now eliminated for you. Now, if you don't have a choice, you just fish when you can, because giants bite every day, right? It's not like they can wait 2 weeks between meals. They still need to feed. But if you have a choice, more of them will feed during those peak periods. It's that easy. Now, if you are on a lake that is murky and muddy, and you're wondering if you can catch night fish, yes, you can. Here's a tip. Focus around the full moon. The brighter that moon, the better those murky and muddy water fisheries seem to do. Now, flip side. If your water is crystal clear, yes, you can night fish. No problem. But I recommend doing it around the new moon, the darkest time of the month. True darkness. It's tough because you can't see anything. I mean, you're going to wind up a swim bait. I'm telling you, it's coming now. And when you do it, don't be embarrassed. We've all done it. You're going to think you're a full cast length away from the bank. You're going to wind up a swim bait and you're going to throw it clean over the top of somebody's house. And you're going to lose it. Man, it happens. I have been there. Because you have no depth perception. It is truly pitch black. You think you're close to the bank and you're way out there, or you think you're way out there and you're right up in it. Man, I have wound up a bait thinking I'm more than a cast length from the shore, and I'm like 10 feet from the bank. And I sent that thing so far up that hillside, it wasn't even funny. It's part of it. Just understand that you are not a creature of the night. It will take some time to adapt. But those big bass, they are a creature of the night, and you can catch some monsters. So go out there, be a little bit uncomfortable. It's going to pay off. Guys, I hope this helps you. It's been a long time since we've done a night video. We haven't done it in years, but we love night fishing. We've caught a lot of big bass doing it. You can too. Get out there. If you have questions, leave them down there. We'll answer them for you. We'll do the best we can. I'm going to link all this gear down in the video description because this is a lot of stuff for you to try and keep track of. It's a ton of stuff. But I'm going to simplify it as much as I can into those 4 categories for you. Keep your colors simple. Stay confident. Always keep those slow-moving baits available. You're going to want them every time you go out. Then you can mix in with the crank and the wake bait and your faster baits. You can mix those in and get those really, really big bites that you might have missed the other way. But when it's not working, you go right back to those slow baits. That's your confidence. You're going to catch them. Appreciate you guys. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We put content like this out all the time. We are here to help. Hit that subscribe button. We'll talk to you soon.